Okay, so we have time for enough time for questions for this session. Okay. Any questions from the audience for any of the three talks? So I have a bit of a question, which is, I guess, an egocentric question. Perhaps not scientific, but I have to scratch the itch. I have a feeling that since we started with this protest a half a year ago, we are very creative. And my other feeling is that the other side is not as creative. When there was this big demonstration in Jerusalem organized by right-wing parties, everything was sort of duplicated from and corrupted, perhaps, from demonstrations that took part by us until that part. We are still waiting for the next demonstration. See what they come up. But I have a feeling for people here that study art in respect to these issues. So how can it be that they seem to be less creative? Perhaps somebody come to the microphone because it's nobody, and people on Zoom will not. Somebody on Zoom want to comment?
Sure.
You can have a real and mean. I think the real answer can be mean if you want, and the mean answer can be real.
I would like to say something afterwards.
Somebody on Zoom wanted to comment?
Yes, afterwards, please.
Yeah, I do believe that there is a sense of, okay, we were wonderful, very creative, we did wonderful things, look at us, how creative and beautiful we are, and suddenly you are facing reality. So creativity is important, demonstrations are highly important, but I think people are a little bit tired from trying to invent themselves anew every time. I think it's normal. I do think in line with what we have heard today, that the demonstrations are going to be, unfortunately, more violent and less polite and less artistically creative. I believe we are in this point of time, and I do hope I'm wrong, but that's what I feel about it.
Inat, you wanted to say something?
Yeah. Although this has taken me to a different place. The first is, I don't know about the trajectory of where we're heading. It does not seem very hopeful. I can agree to that. And none of us are prophets, but there are no real reasons to believe that this dare game is ending quickly. I will say two things, maybe. Alon, you said something about qualifying the creativity of our side, one side versus another. I want us to be really careful with that, because I don't even know how to begin to assess that. I think the demonstrations and the protests have been incredibly creative, and among other reasons, because they were created with strife and with heart and with a lot of thought, and because art, this kind of art, is very compelling to the population that are called forth in a demonstration. I think a different kind of creativity might be the one applied in other communities, not lesser, but different. I also want to say, I think we see more, or there is a high visibility for art, particularly before we end in violent situations. It's not that art dies, as actually Professor Yair just named, right? In the Third Reich, there was a lot of art. It just, in some ways, was not as expressed openly and not in the same way. And I think this is the time, this is the big fight. So there's a big push. So everything is very out in the open, in the streets, in your face. Anybody who can and wants to say something in a unique way and creatively on a T-shirt, and in other ways, and the media is putting it forth. I think this is part of all power forward. Yeah, I'm not very hopeful, but I'm not very hopeful not because of creativity. I think creativity will find its way. But I think we're really seeing some global and some local, very difficult trends, and ones that even my beloved art and creativity is probably not likely to change as quickly. So I hope we keep our souls. This actually reminds me of a conversation that Alexander presented yesterday about the ongoing prayers in a set time, creating a time for prayer that is maintained. And I hope that we can keep up with the creative and the spirited creative resistance, even when things go possibly worse. So,
let me throw in another thought. I think there's an element of a carnival in the current protests on the liberal side. So people, there's a show, and we all come to the show to show and to see how expressive other people are. And it somewhat reminds the process that happened in the 2011 protest movement with the tents, which was extremely artistic. And another note is, I think the demography of the protest is changing, and I would expect more out and more resistance out to appear as younger people begin showing up in greater numbers than they used to be at the beginning, which was, as we saw, the grandmothers. And I think the demography of the protest is shifting to younger people, and we'll see more and more creative and extremist performance of art.
Yes, definitely when I started, the age line was above my age, and now it's below my age.
Yeah, so I just wanted to point out that early on when the protest started, I told everybody, my friends in Israel and abroad, that I'm optimistic that there will be no dictatorship in Israel, and that what happened in Poland and Hungary will not happen in Israel because of two features Israelis have. One is that they're not obedient by nature. Second, they have a sense of humor. And of course, this is just a subjective impression I have of the Israeli culture, which I think some of our friends abroad actually share with me and agree on that. But what I wanted to ask, I don't know, anybody who's studying art culture and all that, is if you're looking at other resistance movements that are sort of similar, do you is this concept of using humor studied? Are there articles about it? And I'm not asking you, I'm asking if there's anybody in the audience that is an expert on the subject.
So I'm not an expert on the subject, but I've been here in the States on a sabbatical during the BLM protests, and I was walking with the protests and seeing, I think it was in Atlanta, which was half demolished and half full of graffiti. So you saw banks, with the window glasses shattered, yet the doors covered with wood, but all with graffiti. And so artistic expression during protest is not limited to Israel. It's very effective. It's fascinating. And it allows people who don't have a voice. Otherwise, few of us can write an op-ed to Ynet or whatever, but everybody can have a shirt drawn or have a poster and make a graffiti, and so it allows a voice in circumstances that we are feeling quite silenced by the government.
I would like to add a word maybe. And I know we're almost out of time, Aaron, so I'll be quick. I'll just say that my original research was about resilience and creativity in New Orleans after Hurricane Katrina. And one of the features that really helped people cope, specifically in New Orleans, is that idea of humor and the use of art collectively in community as well as individually, but also as part of Mardi Gras, as part of Jazz Fest and so forth. So I think there's a right intuition there. That's something in the nature of being creative, and I would say probably stubborn and individualistic and cynical might be of help to us here. However, we're also I think prone to very difficult times and challenges with one another. So it's a very specific shield, but there is actually research about that and about the place of humor in art.
Okay, so I'll just make one comment before we summarize. What I was hinting at is that not that I don't think that there's any creativity on the right side, but I think since a very large percentage of those who are supporting the right come from frameworks which don't encourage out-of-the-box feeling out of a very specific border, I think that that limits their ability to be creative in certain aspects. And again, if you look at Israel as the startup nation, look at the percentages of the people who participate in those parts that we identify as the startup nation. And where are they in this current stance? So I think that does say something about where we are, and I think the same thing goes for the various reservists representing various arms of the Israeli army. Also represent people who are very often at the cusp of creativity in security aspects. So I think there's also something to be said there. So, but I won't go more than that because I don't want to offend too many people.